Okay, so there we go. Okay, so well, welcome, Hazel, and
Thank you.
this is fantastic. This is my first time, I think, trying to do a Zoom interview, certainly between England and France. It's probably your first as well, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Yeah, well,
So
well,
this should be fun.
well, I hope so. Let's see how it goes. But thank you very much for being a guinea pig, anyway, for Devon Book Club. And I mean, the purpose of this particular conversation is because, with great excitement, I imagine. I mean, you're literally just about to launch the next of your series of books, aren't you? Undressing Stone.
I am, yes. Publication day on Monday, so it's extremely exciting. Very very busy time, and quite scary as well.
Well, I
Quite
can
frankly.
imagine. I can imagine. And we'll come back to a bit more about that a bit later on in the conversation. I thought probably what would be really helpful and interesting for the purposes of people watching this would be, first of all, just to get to know a little bit about you. So before we talk about the books, I mean, you're an English woman, having run your own business and lived a long time in Wales, and now you're in the Loire and Paris via India and all sorts of other places, I think, along the way. So just be
Yes.
interested a little bit about that journey, I think.
Mm. Well, I am English. I was born in London and grew up in London, so I'm a Londoner. But I ran off to Wales with my then boyfriend when I was a teenager, and led an interesting sort of back to nature life on a farm in the middle of nowhere. And that lasted for some years, but after that I moved further north and went to Bangor, where I went to university, and I did my studying there. I had by that time a daughter, and so I stayed in Wales, and Wales became my home. So I see myself as an honorary Welsh person, really.
Yeah.
So yeah, I lived there for nearly 30 years. I did work in business. I worked in education always, and so I ran education businesses. I was a teacher for a long time, but in the private sector, not in terms of private schools, but in terms of working for private companies who are providing services to schools.
Mm.
So I did that for a long time. I taught sociology and philosophy. And I kind of did, the career thing. I rose through the ranks of that company. So I became head of my teaching department. I became then head of the entire teaching team after that, and just continued until I ended up actually running the thing, running the company. So that was good. It was a really good and interesting career, and I worked for a couple of different companies like that, doing a very similar thing. I was, just before I moved to France, I was CEO of a very similar company. But that was, yes, I moved to France 5 years ago, and it was the classic story, really. It's because I met a chap.
Always the way.
Always the way, exactly. So I was having a sabbatical in India, and I was working for a charity organisation. I was writing articles for a magazine in India, an English language magazine. And so I was there for a couple of months, and right at the start of my sabbatical time working for this organisation, I spotted this French chap. Well, I didn't know he was French. I just thought he was quite good looking.
Is he watching this? I don't.
So I went to introduce myself, as you do. I'd been divorced for a long time, so I was very single, and we sort of hit it off, really. So, and he was there as well, working for the same charity. He was supposed to be teaching French, but when he arrived, he was told that he had to teach English, and he didn't speak a lot of English, actually.
Right.
So that was fun for him. But it was a very interesting time for him and I, because we didn't really share much of a language at that point. So we were really focusing a lot on how to communicate, and that was quite interesting. We did a lot of traveling together at that point, a lot of very long bus journeys on rickety Indian buses, and we managed. It's very interesting when you have the right kind of motivation, how you can find a way to communicate despite the fact that you don't share a language. Yeah. So in a way I want to say, and the rest was history. That's the short version, so I guess we'll have the short version here.
Yeah, that's probably as wise. You're still making history anyway, aren't you? So it's certainly a long way away from finishing it. So it's interesting because, I mean, you mentioned a number of things in there, and obviously a career in education, sociology, philosophy, India. I mean, there's a whole, and the travels that you went on, not just there, but I know you've been further around the world as well. And I guess all of that feeds into the succession of books that you've written, because your debut was set in India, and then you've progressed from there. So perhaps translate all that a little bit for us into the works that you've written.
Yeah, it is interesting. And so the time in India where I met my partner, that wasn't the first time I'd been to India. I'd spent time in India before that. And it's had kind of always been on my radar since I was a child. I'd always wanted to go and didn't particularly know why. And eventually I did go some years ago with a good friend of mine, female friend, and we did some traveling in India together. And I was just overwhelmed by all sorts of things, really. It wasn't the first time I'd been outside Europe, and it wasn't the first time I'd been to a developing country, but nonetheless the entire experience affected me very viscerally. The sensory overload, the difference in culture, the difference in way of life, everything, both the poverty and the opulence, the extremes that do exist, certainly in some parts of India anyway. And I just wanted to find a way to kind of process all of that, really. And so I didn't set out to write a book at that point. I was journaling. I was just writing my impressions, writing my thoughts, my feelings. And I started that in the plane on the way home. And I just continued, really. I just continued writing. And it turned into a novel. And so I hadn't expected that. And I just thought, okay, good. So we're writing a novel. Let's do that then.
It's interesting you say about journaling, because I mean, we met in India back in February this year, didn't we? That's where we met. And I remember you saying to me that you almost envied me the fact that it was my first time, as you watched me sitting there writing in a journal myself. So I hadn't realised that the way that connected with you.
It's really true, and despite the fact you said before, and it's true, I love travel, and I'm fortunate enough to have the opportunity to travel quite widely, and yet it is India that calls me back time and again. So I've been there, I think, 8 times now. But I think my love of India, it's a bit like, your first love of your life, or maybe your first car, or absolutely your first novel, certainly. But there's only one. And I just remember so strongly, being there for the first time. And despite the fact that every time I go back to India, I connect with it very strongly. And in many ways, parts of India feel like home, in a sense. But nonetheless, that very first time, I still have a very sensory and sensual memory of how that was. And I imagine that you can relate to that well, having recently had your first time there too.
I certainly can. So moving so your debut novel was there. The second novel, Geranium Woman, was very different to that, wasn't it? I mean, that seemed to draw in some way from your own professional background as well, to some degree anyway.
Absolutely, yeah. So the first novel really did, as I say, it grew out of my time in India, and it really is about travel in India, and what travel does for us, how travel changes us in many ways, and those were some of the themes. I was also playing with themes of home and identity and this kind of thing. The second book, The Geranium Woman. It is partly based set in India, but it's mainly based in France, in Paris. And I drew on my time working in business. None of my books are autobiographical, but I think most writers would say that they draw from their own experiences and what they've encountered, who they've encountered, etc. And working in business for me was a very interesting experience. I was a female in a fairly male-dominated environment, and despite the fact that I was working in education, which we assume to be female-dominated, it is very interesting because even today, the further up the ranks you climb, the fewer and fewer women you encounter. And so for me at board level, I didn't, obviously I did have female colleagues and I met other women, but it was still male dominated. And it was fairly traditional. It was a traditional business setting. We were very profit driven, we were very growth driven, and despite the fact that all of us on the board almost all of us had come from an educational background and valued that and valued the fact that we were providing something that would ultimately be of use and that would have some intrinsic value beyond what people were paying for the service. We all believed that, but nonetheless the bottom line was profit and growth, and that puts certain constraints on how you can operate within business. It puts certain constraints on your relationships with various stakeholders, with your shareholders, etc., and ultimately with the people that you're providing the service for. And I really wanted to explore that. I wanted to explore whether it's really ultimately possible to run a business that we might describe as good in the holistic sense of the word. I don't mean good as in successful, it makes lots of money, but it does some good in the world. Or does the profit motive always and inevitably get in the way? So that was one of the things I really wanted to explore, and really and continue to be interested in themes of corporate social responsibility and the impacts that business have on the environment, on the people that work for them, and so on. So part of my motivation for writing The Geranium Woman was to really explore through my main character's eyes some of what I was exploring when I worked in business. So that was interesting. So it was partly the corporate social responsibility theme and partly the female leadership and what is it like to be a woman, working at that level in an organization. And just in case that, I don't find that dry, I find that interesting and quite exciting, but just in case, that did seem a bit dry, I thought, well, okay, my main character, I'll give her two interesting lovers. So, so she has, these two lovers who are very, very different, and through her relationships with them, what I wanted to explore, perhaps not to the same extent, but as a sub-theme, is our preconceptions about what relationships should be, and the difference between transactional relationships where you might provide one another with reciprocal support, whether that's financial or emotional, whatever, or other kinds of relationships that are perhaps based on, as is one of her relationships, radical honesty. And this idea that each individual does exactly what he or she wants to do, and is not beholden to the other in any way. So they were her two lovers are kind of extremes to some extent, and so she's negotiating her way through that. That was really good fun. I really enjoyed writing.
Yeah. Well, that came across in the way the book was written anyway, I think. But strong women are very much a central theme to your writing anyway, I think, aren't they? And if we turn to Undressing Stone now and think a little bit about that, and I thought I was interested. I'd start with the quote that you have right at the outset of the book, which I thought you might like to unpack a little bit for us. Now, it says, "I saw the angel in the marble." And I saw the angel. You can help me finish this. I saw the angel in the marble and carved until I set him free. Yeah, sorry, I can't read my own handwriting. That's the problem there. It just shows this isn't rehearsed, doesn't it? Yeah, that's Michelangelo. But I thought it was an interesting quote to choose, and I wondered if you'd introduce Undressing Stone and unpack that for us a bit.
Yeah, so the famous quote by Michelangelo, who is obviously the sculptor who sculpted many famous works, including the David sculpture, very, very powerful, beautiful sculpture. And his idea was that hidden within the depths of the stone is a thing of beauty. And all we need to do is take off everything that doesn't contribute to that beauty or that is hiding it to reveal what's at the core of the stone. There are one or two quotations that are assigned to him that he may or may not have said. But that one I think he did say, and one of them was he was asked, I think, he's supposedly was asked by a disciple, oh, how is it possible that you can carve such a thing of beauty as the David statue? And he reportedly said, I just kept on carving until David appeared, So it's that kind of idea, really, that the essence, the core of beauty is there, and we just have to undress, if you like, the stone to reveal it in its true glory.
Yeah, and Sian, who's the I'm not sure if the heroine's quite the right word, but the focus, the main character in the story. I mean, the book's in two halves, isn't it? I mean, there's her leaving of Wales, little link back to Wales there again, and moving to deep France, where you're also sitting now. So there's some connections to your experience in the book, isn't there? Even if it's not autobiographical. So the first half of the book is her reasons for leaving and her experience when she gets there, and the second half you call Undressing, don't you? So that's very much, I guess, about her gradually revealing more about herself.
It is a metaphor, yes. So the first half of the book is called Stone, and her ex-husband describes her as very stony. He doesn't like it when she does her stony face thing. She's not very good at expressing her emotions, and she doesn't particularly want to express her emotions. She's a very private person, and this affects the kind of relationships that she's able to form, and she's self-sufficient in some ways, but maybe that's not the healthiest way to be, maybe. So the first part is really sort of setting that up, and yes, the second part is undressing. So the layers of Sian, in a sense, are stripped away, and we begin little by little to have Sian revealed to us through a series of crises and traumas and difficulties and challenges that she has had in her life that many people will relate to. I think she is ultimately, in my view anyway, a very relatable woman, because although what she's actually doing with her life, maybe not everyone might get the opportunity to go off and live in another country, but nonetheless, her challenges in life are they're very human challenges, and so ultimately the stripping away of the layers of Sian, in a sense, we can see that as the stripping away of the layers of anyone who is grappling with any kind of human challenge and wants to really experience themselves more deeply. I really writing her.
That came across as well, and I thought as an evolution of your writing from the other two books. I mean, you could see, well, at least I felt I could see a depth and an intensity in the writing almost that I'm not sure. I think they were there in the other books, but I thought were even more present in this one. It felt like it came from somewhere really very powerful from you.
And it felt like that for me as well, and I've thought about that, and I've wondered why, because I didn't set out to do that particularly. I suppose partly I connect with Sian quite deeply in many ways. I mean, again, her story is not my story, but maybe there's something of me in Sian. I think as well, the main character in The Geranium Woman, she was a very steely woman. She was very reserved. She was very collected. She was very calm. And I wanted to write somebody a bit different. And it's interesting because I think I'm quite reserved in some ways, and I'm quite collected. And so for me, the challenge of writing a woman who was able to let go of some of that was an interesting challenge for me personally and emotionally. And the way that I did that with Sian was not to set out to write some crazy character, you know, that I wouldn't probably be able to write very authentically, because I'm not that person, you know. I'm quite introverted and so on. And so I think the idea of revealing her gradually through the book as the story unfolds was also me playing with that as a writer, and finding my voice within her character, or finding her voice within her character, gently and slowly. And I wonder if I hope anyway, maybe that gives it a profundity and a depth of power. I hope so anyway.
Yeah, well, I certainly think so. I mean, I had the privilege of having an advanced copy of the book to read, so that was great. And I would say for any men that are watching this, actually, although you're talking about a female character and about, you know, how female characters feature very strongly in all your work. I mean, don't be put off, guys, because this is an interesting character, male or female. I mean, I think I found her very relatable as well, and it was something that there was a lot in what she was talking about that spoke to me as well. So I think men should not be put off reading this book. And the other thing I would say about it, if I may, but by all means comment further on that, but the other thing I was going to ask about is place, because it, almost in the same way as you talk about revealing Sian through the book, I mean, she's set in deep rural France. There's no spoilers in here. I shan't reveal anything, but the way in which you locate her, the house that she's living in, and the way in which she relates to that and the local environment, it seemed to me as though there was a sort of metaphor there as well that ran alongside the character reveal. I don't know whether that's what you intended, but that's how I read it.
Yeah, I think I did in a way, and I think there are two things there. I love writing place. Actually, I love bringing place alive, and it's interesting because in some of the reviews of my previous books, people have commented that I seem to do that well, and I like that. That's really nice feedback for me, because it's something that I feel that I really want to do. For me, the setting is almost like another character. And it's what I really, for me, the kind of books I love reading, because I love reading as well as writing. I'm not a fan of those books that suffer from what we call white room syndrome, you know, where you've just got kind of disembodied dialogue and things going on without very much background context. And for me, what I love reading and what I love writing is, you know, the more layered, complex, textured kind of experience where, you know, the place where you are is really contributing profoundly and deeply to what's going on. So what I hope is it's not the old, you know, it was a dark and stormy night and we know it's all going to be dramatic now. It's not that, you know, but it's a kind of, you know, placing a person so deeply in a place that for the reader, what I hope is that they're not simply told where the action takes place, but they feel themselves to be there. And that was what I was really aiming for. And it was one of the reasons why, with the first book and the second, actually, both times I took myself off to the place where they were largely set. So it was one of the reasons why I went back to India a lot of times to get the book written, because writing in place is very powerful. You've got not only the sights, but the sounds, the smells, very physical and very sensual. And the same with the Geranium Woman, partly in India, but also that was set largely in Paris. And so I took myself out into the streets of Paris and into cafes and so on to write it there. And with Undressing Stone, I wrote it almost exclusively, actually, where I am now, which is the Loire Valley in France. And I never actually say in the book specifically where it's set. It's just rural France, but it was very much influenced by where I am now. It's very rural where I am. Here it's quite, I'm to some extent isolated. It's a little hamlet, and it's very lush. There are vines and sunflowers in the summer. It's the winters are very sharp, and it's the summer days are very long and stretch into very nights where you can see the entire Milky Way, and all of that to me is just so sensual. It's beautiful and profound, and it really speaks to me in a way that I wanted to express through the experience of Sian. And it was, in a sense, beautiful to set her there. It seemed to work with the theme of a sculptor sculpting hard stone, so you've got this juxtaposition between the stone and the chips of the stone, and chipped off and revealing what's under the hard stone, with this very lush sort of sensual experience that she's having in the field and in the garden, and with the environment and the weather and so on. So I love the sensuality of that juxtaposition as well.
Yeah, well, I think you've just demonstrated why your books are so beautiful to read, because you've just written it in words almost, as you've told us. So that's lovely. I wish we had a lot longer to talk more about it, but I hope that's given people enough of a sense of what the book's about to want to go out and buy it. And just returning to where we started, I mean, the launch date is the 4th of June. Lots of events and things around that, but a few quite unusual ones, including a prison, I think, somewhere along the line.
Yeah, my very first book launch is in a prison, and I volunteer in Style Women's Prison in Cheshire, and I run creative writing classes there, and I talk with the women about reading and about books, and we share book recommendations, and I think it's going to be a really special book launch. For me, I'm passionate about literature and about reading anyway, and I believe very firmly that books can have, and I'm sure the listeners will agree with this, or the people watching this, that books can have a profound influence on us as individuals, and so much more so, I think, when you don't have your liberty. I think books can take on an even greater role in that context. So I'm very happy to have my very first book launch at Style. So that will be very special, I think. But there is for the rest of this year, really. There are lots of launches in the UK and in France as well. I've got a very big book launch happening in my old university in Bangor in North Wales. So that's going to be quite a big deal, actually. It's going to be open to the public, but there are going to be lots and lots of people there, so that'll be really good fun. And then there are launches, other launches in Cheshire and in London, and as I say, in Paris as well. So a really busy year. All my launches and events are on my website, actually, so if anybody did happen to be interested in coming along to support one and maybe have a signed copy, I'd be delighted if people felt they wanted to do that. That would be lovely.
Okay, well, that's great. We'll post the details of that in case anybody does. And I think just to sort of finish, I mean, I think you ought to, I imagine, would want to say a word or two about the team that's been around you with producing the book as well, and your publisher and so on. So would you like to acknowledge them? You can even mention Pierre again if you feel you need to.
I will. Well, my book, Undressing Stone, is published by Cinnamon Press, who have published all three of my books to date. They're a small press publisher based in the wilds of North Wales, and they are passionate about giving certainly debut authors a voice. So I was very, very grateful to have my very first novel published by them, a complete unknown at that time. They really took a chance on me and have really worked very closely with me over the years to help me to hone my craft. I've been given some really excellent mentoring and editors along the way. And they're a really interesting organisation. The woman who runs Cinnamon Press, Jan Fortune, very impressive woman, very interesting background. She's a writer herself, and I am absolutely, grateful for the opportunity that I've had with Cinnamon Press. So I absolutely want to thank them and the team who are the brains behind, that publishing house. Adam Craig, who does the graphic design for the book covers in Cinnamon Press, he has done an outstanding job with my book cover for Undressing Stone. I love it. It's beautiful. It's sensual. It just encapsulates the theme so well. So absolute kudos for him for that. And there are lots of people, far too many people to mention. I do, I've got the acknowledgements where I say thank you to lots of people, but I do want to say thank you to Pierre. You mentioned Pierre. He's my male muse.
We should just clarify that he is the guy you're with.
He's the guy I met in India.
He's not just some stray Frenchman you've got lurking at the bottom of the garden or something.
That could be fun, but no. No. Pierre is the chap. He is the chap I approached, in the charity years ago, because I thought he looked interesting, and I was right. He is interesting, and he's absolutely supportive of my work. Yeah. There are some shades of Pierre in some of the characters in my books, but I'm not going to say very much.
You're not going to reveal that, no. I think you better respect Pierre's integrity.
Exactly.
Just one last thing you did say to me, I think on an email earlier on. I'm just checking my notes, but at Hertfordshire University, I think, are also going to include your book on their creative MA. I think you were saying.
They are. I know. I just found out about that recently, and I'm just overwhelmed. I'm just so honoured by that. And the MA programme at Hertfordshire, it's run by a very talented woman, Jennifer Young, who is an author in her own right. She has written a brilliant spy thriller, actually, Cold Crash, so little plug for Jennifer. But she runs the MA programme at Hertfordshire, and she approached me, and we've discussed having Undressing Stone as one of the set texts. So that is a bit daunting, to be honest. So all these very clever people who are going to be unpicking my book and analysing it to within an inch of its life. I just really hope they enjoy it.
Yeah, well, I'm sure they will. Well, I mean, congratulations on all your books, but on Undressing Stone in particular, I really did love it, and I'm sure lots of other people are going to. We are doing a book giveaway on Devon Book Club either side of the 4th, so we'll announce the winner for that towards the end of next weekend sometime. And some lucky person is going to benefit from that, which is fabulous. We're also talking, aren't we, about whether in the next 6-8 weeks or so we might see whether we can get a number of people who've read your book coming together around another one of these Zoom conversations, but seeing if we can do it as a bit of a group chat, which will be another first for us if we manage to do that. So I hope that can happen, and maybe we can get you down to Devon as well at some point, and meet some of the folk down here, because that would be wonderful to do.
Well, that would be really good fun, and I will love it if well, hopefully not if, but when we do the chat with a few readers, that would be fascinating. I would love that. So if anybody does, feel inspired to read the book, then please do, and and possibly put your hand up for a bit of a discussion. That would be really good fun.
Well, I shall certainly be asking for willing volunteers to have a go at that. So Hazel, we'll leave it there, but thank you very much again for chatting to us, and I hope you've got a nice pleasant evening there in the Loire. It's horrible here in Devon, I have to say. Not nice at all.
We have had Gothic weather here recently. We've had absolute thunderstorms and lightning, but tonight is very calm. It's lovely. So yes, I shall probably go out into the garden with a glass of something following this. So.
Sounds like. Oh, was that bad? Was it? You need a glass to recover from it. That sounds ideal. Right. Well, we'll say goodbye from there. Then. Thanks ever so much again.
Ian, thank you. Really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Okay. Bye then.